Everybody, good morning and good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this webinar, Reclaim the Game, how the World Cup 22 in Qatar demonstrates the urgent need for human rights-based and people-oriented international sporting events hosted by the Asia and West Asia units of the Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation. My name is Ulrike Lauerhass, and it's a big pleasure for me to do this little introduction for you and welcome you. Before then we start the debate. We are really happy to have experts with a wide range of variety of perspective, experiences, knowledge on the panel for you today. And so we want to spread light on what is happening in the context of mega sporting events worldwide in terms of human rights, workers' rights, democracy, participation, and probably we click on much more other topics as well. I think it's quite obvious that looking into the past and into the different regions of the world, there are patterns that we can observe, which show the more or less systematic character of the way that public funds are being used, not for what the citizens need, like roads, public services, schools, hospitals, all sorts of things, but for oversized stadiums and more or less useless infrastructure, at least after the event's useless. So it's basically a shift of public funds from the bottom up to the political and economic elites' pockets. This goes along with oppression of freedom of speech, freedom of press, as we have observed maybe in Sochi Winter Olympics 2014, Beijing 28 Summer and 22 Winter Olympics, even militarization in the case of Rio 2014 Football World Cup and 2016 Summer Olympic. All these examples show that, there's a lot of things are happening. Also, we know that there's expulsion of certain neighborhoods, gentrification of the cities, the example of London, maybe UEFA Cup 2020, and of course in a lot of other places as well. And I'm not even mentioned now the striking environmental and climate damages that are related to sport events in one or the other form and more or less everywhere. To strengthen the debate on these issues, we produced a world map raising these questions, which you can see behind me. We call it Blowing the Whistle on Human Rights, and you can find the link to this online version in the chat, like a PDF that you can download. And of course, we can also send you a hard copy version so that you can also put it onto your wall. On the other side of the map, I don't know if this is easy now to show, but I try. This is the map, and on the other side, we gathered some information on workers' rights, with nicely illustrated from our friends from the collective Cinema. Thanks to you for all your work on that. Highly recommend you to order your issue. But now zooming in a little bit from the general worldwide level to the question at hand, the World Cup in Qatar in this year, it's not even 6 months now that will start. We published a brochure that I also like to show you, Reclaim the Game, what we can learn from the controversial World Cup in Qatar. You also find the link in the chat function, and you also can order it on our website in a hard copy version. A big thanks in terms of this publication to the sports journalist Ronny Blaschke, who was the mastermind behind the concept of the publication and also contributed as an author. You will get to know him in a second because he's today's facilitator of the debate. Thanks a lot, Ronny. The aim of today's debate on the World Cup in Qatar is, on the one side, to look back to the experiences that we gathered in the past, in terms of what is happening, in terms of how to protest against the negative impacts, and what lessons to learn. On the other side, we want to look ahead and find out what needs to change and what kind of human rights concept is needed for future hosts of mega sport events. What criteria of selection of the next hosts are needed, and how do we get there, and how do we get the organizing bodies like FIFA, IOC, the National Olympic Committee, to become more transparent, more accountable, responsible, and in the end, democratic. The next events are announced already. The European Cup will be in Germany in 2 years, 24. The World Cup in 4 years from now in Mexico, United States of America and Canada. And of course, the next ones are being awarded now. So it's no time to lose, we think. We have to get moving and to make the change that we want to see happening really come forward. Therefore, we are now preparing a speakers tour with migrant workers from Qatar that will move and debate with you in 8 different cities of Germany in the second half of September this year. And you're warmly welcome to participate and discuss further issues with us. Also, this you can find on our website very soon, at the dates and the places and what exactly will be the topic we will talk about. So before you will see now a short animated video on the situation of migrant workers in Qatar, then I will hand over the microphone to Ronny Blaschke. But before all this, I would like to thank my colleagues, Nadja Dorschner, Ines Bohrmeister, Jakob Littmann, and Annika Klügel for their great work to make this project happen, as well as the other colleagues from our political communication unit responsible for all the public relations works, and Caro Wedeking for the fantastic illustrations of the brochure and for our flyers. So I wish you an interesting debate. Please use the Q&A functions of the webinar for your questions and contributions, because afterwards we will try to feed this into the debate. And if you watch the live stream on YouTube or Facebook, use the chat function, please. So thank you very much and enjoy it.
In 2010, FIFA decided that the 2022 World Cup would take place in Qatar on the Arabian Peninsula. A lot has happened since then. Hundreds of thousands of workers came to Qatar to build the necessary infrastructure. Their working and living conditions are harsh. Working more than 12 hours a day in 40-plus-degree weather, lack of health and safety measures, and thousands of deaths. Unpaid overtime, housing large groups of workers in cramped spaces. The COVID pandemic has made the situation even worse. Why do people expose themselves to such harsh working and living conditions? They come from countries like Nepal, India, and Bangladesh. They often live in rural areas where there are few good employment opportunities. They go abroad to support their families financially and to escape poverty. The workers are recruited through agencies. Many of them initially take on large amounts of debt in order to pay the high job placement fees. The agencies promise them a good salary and adequate accommodations. Their contracts are signed before they leave their home country. But upon their arrival in Qatar, the workers encounter a harsh reality. In Qatar, the so-called kafala system takes effect, which condemns the migrant workers to a kind of serfdom. Because employers vouch for their employees vis-à-vis the state, the workers are completely at their mercy. Their passports are confiscated, so they cannot leave the country. Following international protests, a number of reforms were passed. In practice, however, they have had little effect. Many affected people speak of modern slavery. Qatar is like a prison, only without walls. Yet Qatar is the country with the highest per capita income in the world. On average, people with Qatari passports earn 6,200 euros per month. A migrant worker earns just 230 euros. And that's only since a minimum wage was introduced in 2020 in response to international pressure. Qatar is an absolute monarchy and has no separation of powers, no freedom of speech or press, and therefore no possibilities for critical civil society to speak up. Trade unions are prohibited. Qatar's rulers are trying to polish their image with a sports-washing PR strategy through generous financial investments for football clubs and spectacular sporting events. And FIFA plays along with this game because it profits from it. The accusations of bribery know no end. The World Cup is being held in one of the hottest countries in the world, where there is neither a football culture nor the appropriate climatic conditions for the games. But hosting the event in Qatar is above all a political signal. It's intended to secure many economic deals in the long term. The workers have nothing to gain from this, and instead live in uncertainty and without any prospects. The World Cup is happening because football inspires us and people around the globe. That's why those who made it possible need our solidarity. Universal human rights and international workers' rights must be upheld in Qatar, both during the World Cup and after. A meaningful reform of FIFA is needed in order to return sport and a sense of community to the heart of its mission. We demand an end to billion-dollar deals and unchecked exploitation. Everyone has the right to lead a good life.
Yes, thank you very much for this video, and thank you very much, Ulrike, for the introduction. My name is Ronny Blaschke. I'm a freelance journalist and book author, and from me, a very warm welcome as well to our digital panel, Reclaim the Game. Yes, we are about half a year away from what is probably the most controversial sporting event in history, the World Cup in Qatar. But not only Qatar, Qatar perhaps is the symbol of a debate in the sports industry that has been with us for a long time and will be with us for a long time to come. And how can we use sport to stand up for human rights? How can we keep up the pressure to improve migrant workers' living and working conditions? Which demands and standards need to be implemented in a concept for the next major sporting events? This is what we want to talk about, these questions. And of course, we look forward to your opinions, your questions as well. Please feel free to use the Q&A function, drop us a line, and we include your questions and your opinions later during the debate. We are very glad to have a very competent panel with different perspectives, and I'd like to introduce our 5 guests. Piara Powar is with us. He's the executive director of the FAIR Network in London, which tackles all kinds of discrimination in football. Binda Pandey is with us today. She is a representative of the General Federation of Nepalese Trade Unions, GIFONT, based in Nepal. Julia Bustamante, a former member of the Olympics and World Cup People's Committee in Rio de Janeiro. She can tell us something about the previous big events, the World Cup in Brazil, the Olympics in Brazil. Miriam Saage-Maaß, legal director and program director, business and human rights from the ECCHR, the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights in Berlin. And Sebastian Sons, researcher at CAPO, Center for Applied Research in Partnership with the Orient. He lives in Berlin, and he can tell us a lot about the geopolitical impact, about the Persian Gulf region, and the World Cup in Qatar. This debate will be recorded so that we can watch it again, or you can recommend it to friends and colleagues that cannot be with us today. Let's start with the debate, and I would like to take a step back perhaps and ask Julia, because to understand the present, we should perhaps take a look at history. And Brazil, became a synonym for sporting events that maybe didn't really work out perfectly. The Olympics in Rio 2016, before the World Cup in Brazil. Julia, can you bring us up to date? What long-term consequences does Brazilian society still suffer from today?
Good morning. Good morning, because here's the morning. Thank you, Ronny, and everyone for the invitation. And I would say that today, Brazil and Rio, we don't have a very good legacy to speak about concerning mega sporting events. That is to say, up to today, we are a society with more inequality, more poverty, and less economic growth, and all that was promised is indeed not what we see. In fact, we believe that the World Cup in Brazil and in Rio actually served for a project of elitization of football and of soccer, and also of our society in general. Let's say we have a more segregated city, and where the benefits were directed to few people of the richest areas and more touristic areas of the city. And the negative impacts were felt by the entire population, especially racialized people, peripheral people, which suffered with the city becoming more expensive to live in, and also this indirect impacts and also impacted directly. So we could say that indeed we have this legacy of more inequality, more segregation, and of a more militarized control of our city. We had games that were held mainly by public budget. So we estimate that there were 80% public spending and 20% private spending in the health of the games, World Cup and Olympic Games. We still have to manage these big stadiums that are not actually used by the population, that were not did not become public spaces for sports practicing by the population, but are actually today not really used and only accessed by the richest parts of the population. So by the time of the games, we spoke a lot about FIFA standard schools and FIFA standard hospitals. That's not what we see here, but we do see sport infrastructure that is not used. I would also like to say that we still live with the consequences of forced evictions. In Rio, we had about 80,000 people that suffered with forced evictions, families that were transferred for 40 kilometers or 50 kilometers distance from their houses, and they still suffer with lack of infrastructure and public transport to get to their works. We had a lot of repression for informal workers, not only violations for the workers in the constructions of the games, that we had that as well, migrant workers, and we had 10 deaths in Rio in these buildings. But we also had an impact on formal workers that had their tents and workspaces destroyed. And up to today, they haven't had any compensation whatsoever. Yes, and about, to make it quicker, I'm sorry, but we still have suffered with the debt that came from the games in Rio. We have a large debt of our municipality, and although we didn't have a very transparency budget during the health of the games, we estimate that up to 40 billion were spent, and up to today we suffer with a lack of budget expenditure in social policies, in education, and in health. So yeah, to summarize, I could say that billions were spent on stadiums, but not actually to build the city and to build the country around those. So we have this really rich spots where you can take pictures and the tourists can go. But if you walk just a bit away from that, you can see that hunger and poverty and inequality become a major problem in our country. So we really believe that, yeah, we spend a lot of money building stadiums, but we didn't spend a lot of money building people a better place to live and better living conditions in general.
Mm-hmm. Miriam Saage-Maaß from the ECCIHR, you did a lot of research in Qatar. The situation is a bit different. People in Qatar suffer as well, not the Qatari citizens. What would you point out? We heard a lot about reforms in the working sector, environmental issues. Do you see these reforms implemented, or what would you criticize? How is the status quo at the moment in Qatar?
Yeah, so when we did our interviews with and the research with Qatari workers, but also with unions that work with those that are returning from Qatar, it's a few years back, but back then it was very clear that a lot of the workers that are employed in the construction sites for the stadiums and so on are clearly working under conditions that can be labeled as forced labor. The ILO defines forced labor as all work or service which is extracted from any person under the menace of any penalty and for which the said person has not offered him or herself voluntarily. And I think the video very well illustrated how people come to Qatar to work there under the impression that they will be working under very different conditions than they actually do. So this is clearly forced labor. The Qatari government had implemented some new laws which were allegedly going to improve the situation, but more recent research done by others has shown that that is actually not true, and that if at all the situations in some of the very specific construction sites have to some extent improved, but by far not in any of the other construction sites, and then the sectors like in the hotels and so on that are accompanying the preparation for the football for the World Cup. And so yes, I think we've also seen very well in the video how persons are coerced to work under these conditions due to the fact that that economically they are forced to work in this. And so this is, again, we also see on how this system of forced labor, which is really not only very specific to Qatar, but which exists in a lot of places around the world, but how that is actually very closely connected to the way our global economy is running and how global businesses are structuring their work, and how football is sort of has become part of a global business model, I would say.
Mm-hmm. We've seen it in the video, a country or a state that does not really have check and balances like an opposition or free press or labor unions. Is it possible in general that these reforms will be implemented when you don't have really a check and balance stage? Or what other question, what does a state like Qatar need that these reforms will be checked and sanctions if they don't work out?
Well, the one thing that dramatically and also systematically changes and improves working conditions is the fact if workers can organize and if workers have legitimate trade union representation, because it will be themselves, the workers, and through their representatives that can very specifically speak about which conditions need to be improved immediately or in the longer term or the midterm. It's workers that know themselves the best, and they need to find ways to organize. And that is exactly, obviously, not possible in a state like Qatar. And therefore, even if the laws are improved on paper, as long as workers stay under such oppressed and surveilled situations as they do, they will hardly ever be able to actually claim their rights.
Binda, Pandey, we have less than 3 million inhabitants in Qatar. Only about 300,000 have the Qatari citizenship. So only 10% of the people in Qatar are Qatari citizens. And from a few countries, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Nepal, many people who work or are forced to work, as Miriam says, in Qatar. And talking about Nepal, I have a number from 2019, around 365,000 Nepali are working and living in Qatar. Binda, can you tell us something about the difficulties, about the challenges that especially people from Nepal face in Qatar? And how much is the state of Nepal dependent of the money that people are sending over to their home country?
Thank you very much. Yeah, actually, you have already displayed that in the video. The real situation is there, and then the two of the colleagues, they have already explained. We from the G Fund, we started to work in Qatar from the 2011. Actually, that's the same year when the case was filed in the ILO. Since then, what we are observing that the situation was very worse during that time, but when the case was there, and then we are just dealing and we are just organizing, trying to organize them. Now, after starting the ILO office in Qatar, the legally means this the legal change has been happened a lot. And then the what issues we are just raising as a modern age of the slavery, policy in the policy level, it has been addressed, but workers still they are facing the problem. And then, yeah, rightly you raised the issue of this, number of the Nepali workers. They were the the first. In the last year, but now I think it is second or third in the bigger population in among the migrant workers in Qatar. Now, because of this ILO office, there is some apps, and then if there is any problem, the workers they can have this opportunity to make a complaint, and then if there would be the complaint, and then within a week it will be taken care. But the problem is that still they fear to file the case, and if we'll go through this the accommodation and other thing, according to law, they will have all the facilities according to the contract. But if there is any problem getting this wage and other facilities, they can make a complaint through that apps. But they don't want to make that complaint because they have a fear that if they will be making the complaint, still they might be sent back to home country. So that they could not overcome that kinds of fear. And then regarding the accommodation also, if some of the accommodation it is run by the government company, that is comparatively good, but those the private company run accommodation, still it is very difficult. And then the working hours, still it is a long working hours, and then the working longer hour, it is not paid according to the laws. So this kind of problem is still there. And then I was just talking with my colleague who are dealing with the workers issue based in the ILO office, and then the G-Fund support group colleague also. So still they are facing the problem that though there is a legal provision and there is apps and there is some this kinds of instrument, but they don't have that courage to make a complaint. And then linking with this our economy, and right now we are facing the difficulties in the country, and then we are encouraging them to send their remittance, and it is supporting our economy. But we as the Nepali, we don't believe that it will sustain longer. So we have to think another way to make our economy more sustainable, working in the Nepal. But right now it is supporting a lot from these people because they are working there bigger number.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sebastian Sons is a Middle East expert. He has researched in Qatar and Saudi Arabia. He focuses on migration and geopolitics around football as well. He will publish a new book about the World Cup and Qatar that will be released in September in German. And Sebastian, I would like to ask you, Qatar in Germany, in Britain, in some states of the European and the so-called West, was criticized for a long time, and maybe the narrative changes at the moment when our vice chancellor traveled to Qatar a few weeks ago because we need some gas after the war. And the perception in Germany, or I think maybe in the UK as well, was there are no work relations. Can you tell us something about the political and the economical relations between Qatar and states like Germany and the West, and the role that football plays in this geopolitical network?
Thank you, Ronny, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's a really interesting conversation and discussion. I think from a Qatari point of view, the main goal of the World Cup is to establish itself as a platform and as a network and facilitator in international politics. Qatar is a small state. It is encircled by big regional players such as Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey. And therefore, there was always a concern by the Qatari leadership, by the ruling family, to be threatened by external enemies within the region. And we have seen that this threat was extremely relevant during 2017 and 2021 Gulf crisis, when Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt introduced a blockade against Qatar, which was also due to the fact that Qatar will host the World Cup. So a sports dimension was extremely relevant also for this blockade. For Qatar, establish itself as such a platform creates to some extent also security, national security, economic security. Therefore, partnerships with Germany, with the US, Qatar hosts one of the biggest US military bases in the region, investing in international companies such as Volkswagen, Deutsche Bahn, Deutsche Bank, etc. That creates leverage, and that creates also kind of an relevance on the global stage that protects Qatar in times of regional or international escalation. And that works out specifically in sport politics. The World Cup is only the most prominent example, but the investment in Paris Saint-Germain, for instance, but also the partnership, the sponsorship with Bayern Munich is part of this networking and facilitating strategy to become an indispensable international partner for so many actors, not only in the West, but also with partners that are also perceived controversially in the West, such as Iran, the Taliban in Afghanistan, the Hamas in Palestine, etc. So it's not only a pivot to the West; it's also a pivot to other actors that could create or that could bring Qatar in a position in which it has become a relevant and reliable partner. We have seen it after the withdrawal of international troops from Afghanistan, how important Qatar was for Afghan refugees. We have seen it before when Qatar hosted the talks with the Taliban regime, etc. And this is part of the whole of the global strategy of Qatar. And finally, sports can also create kind of a national identity in Qatar, but also in the other Gulf states as well, which will at the end preserve the legitimacy of the Al Thani family, the ruling family. And this is the utmost importance in all of the Arab Gulf monarchies, to preserve the political survival of the leaderships. So by hosting the World Cup, by investing in the top football clubs such as PSG or Bayern Munich, you are also aiming at consolidating the power on the domestic level and to promoting a kind of a national identity that is based on success, that is based on reliability as an international sports partner. And finally, this can create also a common, let's say, common national unity between the nationals, so the Qatari citizens, the leadership, but also the expatriates, which was a very interesting phenomenon during the Gulf Rift, when even non-Qataris were so much in favor of the Emir Tamim in supporting him as kind of a national hero who stood against external resistance or external threat and provided a symbol of resistance.
Thank you, Sebastian. Piara, we talked in the past 10, 12 years mainly about the working rights, but of course there are other topics important at Qatar. There is the queer community that is skeptical, if not scared, to go to Qatar. Women's rights are not as established as in the UK or in Germany. The Fair Network tackles all kinds of discrimination before the World Cup in Russia, before the European Championships, and you rely on partner organization. But what do you do in a country where there is not really a independent, free civil society? Can you tell us a bit about your work before the World Cup in Qatar, and what would you tell gay or lesbian football fans who hesitate to go to the World Cup in Qatar?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ronnie. Thanks, and hello to everybody for the invitation. And it's great to be part of this panel. A lot of questions there, I think, and I think there's a lot, I guess, that is going on around Qatar itself as a host of this World Cup, but also, I guess, the way in which sports organizations are increasingly reliant on states, super wealthy states, who often engage in, I think we can acknowledge that they're engaging in sports washing at the very least. They're trying to build a country brand. They're trying often to present themselves in a kind of respectable face. So there's a lot going on in this space in terms of hosting of sports mega events and hosting by states that are outside, if you like, of the sort of the former hosting profile of states, particularly in football. It was only since the 2010 World Cup, I would say, where South Africa hosted, that football has truly begun to take the men's World Cup, which is the biggest competition that FIFA has around the world, and that is creating problems. It created problems in South Africa, created problems in Brazil, created problems for many of us in Russia, and of course now we're talking about Qatar. So in many ways, the problems that we're seeing highlighted in Qatar are also a result of this new policy by FIFA to make the World Cup, the men's World Cup, more global. And that then throws a spotlight on the hosting countries, some of their internal problems, some of the ways in which they have proposed and have hosted the World Cups themselves. In terms of Qatar, I think one of the problems for us has been, as the discussion touched on earlier on, it's not really a democracy as we recognize it in Western Europe. There is no real NGO sector. There are some NGOs. There is, for example, a national human rights institution, but most of them are connected to the state. And so finding partner organizations to work within a country like Qatar is going to be very difficult, and has been difficult. Our focus has been, as you rightly identified, on LGBTIQ rights. And I guess one of the issues we've had there is that the international human rights community has focused on migrant worker rights, the people who have been brought in, as has been documented already, to build the stadiums and to build the other state-led infrastructure. The problem, I think, has been that if it's possible, there's almost been too much of a focus on that issue and not enough focus, particularly on LGBTIQ rights, but also on gender. That I would say the two other human rights risks of taking a World Cup or other mega sporting event to a country like Qatar. That has meant actually that we're beginning this process rather late of engaging with the Qatari state, engaging with FIFA and other actors in order to get guarantees, safety guarantees for LGBTIQ people who will travel there as fans, as media workers, as people who are there representing sponsors. And it also means there hasn't been enough time to really try to engage with the state and actors in the region to try to get some longer term gains for the community. I think if any of your listeners are in any doubt, same-sex relations in Qatar are unlawful. There are a number of sections of the Qatari penal code that prohibit homosexuality, and quite frankly, the sort of Qatari legislation is a mess. It mixes up paedophilia with legitimate relations between same-sex couples. There has also been identified by, for example, the UN human rights. The UN prison inspections report in Qatar in 2019, that reported in 2020, that there are reports that the Qatari state is enforcing its legislation. So there are people who may still be in prison, who have been in prison because they've been found to be in same-sex relations. The Qatari state is quite open. They monitor the social media accounts of people they suspect are from the LGBTIQ community. We know that there is some kind of an informal hotline for relatives and friends to report people, which then leads to a process of all sorts of sort of action against those individuals. We know that there's a whole load of other action that is being taken that sits alongside the legislation to marginalize the LGBTIQ community. So the question comes, and your answer sort of puts it quite succinctly, will people feel safe working in and around the World Cup? Will they feel safe traveling to the World Cup? And that is the question that we've been working on for the last sort of 18 months, 2 years now. And I think it's fair to say that we are close to getting some safety reassurances from the Qataris and from FIFA, but we haven't had them yet. And within our conversations with them, there are a lot of gaps in the reassurances that are being offered. The Qataris say that they can't talk about the LGBTIQ community openly, partly because of their internal audience, but also partly because of the conflict that they have with their neighbors and the way that it will be seen regionally. They also sort of say that although the sort of the so-called World Cup enabling law, the FIFA law that every country has to pass when it hosts the FIFA Men's World Cup, will mean that all of their legislation is in abeyance, and so therefore the statutes on same-sex relations will not be enforced. They are not saying that they will publicly talk about that, so people will go there sort of blind and not understand really what the position will be. There is very little legacy that we can see as of now for the indigenous LGBTIQ community, whether they are there as migrant workers or whether they are from the Qatari community. So there's a whole range of issues that we're balancing. And I think it's fair to say at this point, there are no clear answers. So if you are a member of the LGBTIQ community and you may be sent there to work, or you may be thinking about traveling as a fan, our message right now is that there are no safety messages that are being given by the Qataris. There is a general welcome message, which the tone of which is to say everyone is welcome, but they most pointedly within that welcome message do not refer to the LGBTIQ community. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of work to be done. And as I say, a lot of that work has begun quite late because of the legitimate focus on migrant workers' rights, but it has left a couple of other areas of human rights risks that are unattended to so far.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Piara. That leads us to the maybe second round. This project of the Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation was all about, we were critical, but we want to be creative and pragmatic as well. So how can we change the industry for the future? And Julia, maybe we can talk about your Olympics and World Cup People's Committee. So we know the sports industry has a lot of problems, will have a lot of problems, but how did you organize the protest? How did you find allies? How did you, we probably all aware that we will not, the six of us, we cannot reform FIFA overnight, but we can, in a bad system, we can fight for something good. Julia, can you give us a bit of some ideas? How did you organize information campaigns? How did you did promotion in the social media? What made the Olympics and World Cup People's Committee successful in Rio?
Thank you, Ronny. So yes, we had a lot of difficulties, but we also had a really rich experience that I believe we can speak about to people from other countries. So the first thing we had to say is that we're not against sports, because that was actually what the government was trying to say. So we had to say we are not against sports, but we believe the games could be held differently. We believe that the World Cup could be held differently, and that's not about being against sports. It's about reshaping them or so, and it's about ensuring that we can stop human rights violations. That was a first challenge because we had to fight a very massive propaganda from the government. But yeah, so the second thing was to say the Olympics and World Cup People's Committee is not trying to steal any social movement, any existing social movement space. We are not here to dispout any space. We are here to make a net. We are here to make a connection between different social movements that already exist. I think that was really important as well, because what we tried to do was to show how different people that were affected by specific interventions, they all were a part of a bigger process going on. So our aim was to articulate all the movements, all the different affected people, building this net. And we said every struggle is our struggle. If you're a Black person suffering from police brutality in the favelas, if you are being evicted, if you are an athlete that lost your training space, because we had a lot of athletes that didn't have any place to train for the Olympics, because of the works, the constructions. If you are someone from the west part of our city that is seeing a 60,000 square meter environmental protected area being destroyed to build a golf camp, and you care about the environmental struggle, then you can find your place in the Popular Committee. And so I think that was really important, because we managed to have agreement that there were different struggle tactics, different approaches. We had NGOs, we had social movements, we had people that were from neighborhoods being affected that weren't actually organized before being affected. We had political parties, we had different approaches, different visions that were together in a common project of saying no to human rights violations in mega sporting context. So I think that was something that we really learned, and also to join with the public universities. So we had a lot of professors and students that participate, and that was really important, because although the main voice is of those who are directly affected, we also need the university professors and researchers backing up these movements, producing knowledge that can say that the propaganda, the government propaganda, is not true. So data was also an ally for us to say that the propaganda of the government was not true. And I think that was what made the World Cup Popular Committee, not only in Rio, we actually had a national articulations of World Cup Popular Committees of all the cities that held the games, and we also made the national meetings for articulation, and also always respecting each group's perspective. And I think that was what made our struggle different, not only in public demonstrations, but also in public debates, meetings, documentaries, dossiers, and I think that was what allowed us to say that we are all connected in our different struggles.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering, I mean, the awarding of the World Cup was 12 years ago. So many reports have been written, documentaries and pictures and articles, and Infantino and the FIFA survived so many scandals. Miriam Saage-Maaß, the legal point of view, for example, the ECCHR, your organization. So how do we do it? How can we hold FIFA or big sports organizations accountable? Do UN and your organization Amnesty have to create a network? I think these networks, they already exist. How can you push them? Who is responsible for that? Switzerland, because the FIFA is in Switzerland. Because I often hear the question, the World Cup shouldn't have been given to Qatar. But how is the FIFA organized, right? The critical debate we have, it's not in many countries, and the FIFA doesn't only exist. So it's not only Switzerland, Norway, and Germany. So what's your idea? You can create a utopia. How can you reform the FIFA and the sports industry?
Okay, I'm not sure I'm best equipped to create a utopia, but so there's, but I want to start somewhere else, and that is on the human rights responsibility of companies as such. And then the question of how could that exemplary be moved onwards to the FIFA, to organizations, because one of the problems to start with, so there has been a growing discussion over the last 15 years that actually companies, and especially multinational companies, are also considered to have obligations and responsibilities for human rights. And that they actually, not only states have the responsibility to ensure that human rights are being respected, but also companies. And here's the question. Now, how do we transfer this responsibility to our other organizations like the FIFA? And I think sort of there's the framework that has been created that is called the UN Guiding Principles. I'm sorry, I'm having a child that has a fit of rage at the moment.
No worries.
That this framework on business and human rights that creates actually obligations of private actors to look into their business relationships and to their not only the direct ones but also those that are further down the chain, and analyze and ask the question: am I impacting human rights in a negative way? Am I impacting human rights further down the chain? And what can I do? And for example, as we talked about companies that might be sending their staff to Qatar, and with the implications that may have on LGBTIQ communities, it's actually something that companies already need to take into consideration when they enter into business relationships with Qatar and the FIFA. And so I think this whole notion that it's not only the classic states, it's not only Qatar that obviously has its own obligations under human rights, but it's all different other actors, as they play such a powerful role that they do in international relations, in international business. And also the FIFA has a lot of power, and therefore they must be also considering themselves as actors that have impacts or even violate human rights. Now, at the moment, it has been tried to sue the FIFA for actually labor exploitation in Qatar in Switzerland. That was not accepted by Swiss courts. It has also been tried to bring FIFA into an OECD mediation under the OECD guidelines for multinational corporations. Also, that has not been accepted. It was also, again, a Swiss entity that was responsible for handling that case. They have not accepted that, but I nevertheless think that this is exactly the way where we need to go, and where we really need to consider, as I said, it's about, who is in a powerful position to impact human rights, and that also we need to put this human rights approach to a lot of policy consideration, to business considerations much more, because that would then give also a guideline on how to structure your business relationships.
What do you think? Why wasn't it accepted? I mean, you're professionals, right? You wouldn't sue someone if you wouldn't think it might be successful, or at least it would go to court. Is the FIFA too powerful, or was it for you was a symbolic gesture? We as ECCHR, we didn't do it really. It was someone else who did it. But well, I think it was exactly the right move, and I would hope it's already a couple of years ago, and maybe by now the dynamic would have changed. I think, again, we can't forget that Switzerland also is a very conservative place, and especially Swiss courts are very conservative. But I think yeah, as we are moving ahead with this concept of corporate responsibility, the question is, when can we move this to FIFA? So
football clubs as of now, or the FIFA as itself, is, as far as I know, considered a non-profit organization, right? So they are not a business entity. That was one of the formal reasons why the OECD contact point wouldn't accept the complaint, because as I know, we're only dealing with multinational companies and not with the FIFA. You know, that's one of the formalistic notions. But I also think, again, I've heard of, for example, the investors community is quite concerned about football clubs like Bayern Munich and their strategic cooperation with Qatar, because they do also consider about finance institutions do quite some human rights due diligence in the sense of, you know, where are we investing our money and what are the, at least the reputational risks that come with that. Mm-hmm. So I think if I would hope that there is some momentum to actually eventually pressure FIFA, but also football clubs in the end to consider their human rights implications. Mm-hmm. And the next step is obviously, I think, the question, which is, again, it's quite similar in the sports world to also the considerations that companies do need to take. How far and how close do we want to collaborate with? Do we want to collaborate with states that have such a bad human rights track record as Qatar? And I think in the business community, there's this constantly sort of this, you know, how close do we cooperate with China, for example? And what are the human rights standards that we are still keeping up, that we're expecting to say, well, if we come here, you know, those are the standards we're expecting in terms of how facilities are being built, how workers are being treated, how civil and political rights are being respected when we enter into this business relationships. And I think this dynamic of trying to get, I mean, I think Western actors are not sticking up to some human rights frameworks closely enough. Yeah.
Okay. Binda, Pandey, when I was in Qatar twice for a longer period of time. And when I was walking, for example, on Friday or Saturday morning in Doha, I see many people from India, Bangladesh, Nepal playing cricket. And not many of these of the workers, I think, are really interested in football. We very often talk about the working condition, but how about the integration of Nepalese, for example, in Qatar? Do you see progress within the society, within the government, within the various and sometimes the various ministries that sometimes compete? Do they really want to integrate people from India, from Bangladesh, from Qatar into their society? Why would they build a country and a city if they only have 300,000 people? So I always wonder, why do they build a country when they don't integrate their working migrants? So what can be done to create a diverse society that maybe can identify with Qatar? Is there something done, and what can be done in the future?
Okay, it is very good question actually. The migrant community actually they have their own society, and then they have their own collaboration, and within the this migrant community, and then I think this integrating with the local people and then the local authority, it is not that easy. But among the Nepali, there is a lot of different kinds of the organization, and then they have that kind of relation, and especially the different support group, they have they are extending their relation with this other Nepali group, as well as nationalities group from the other country, especially in the South Asia, and then Philippines and those countries also. So they have a very good integration among them. And when you were just talking about this, the different games they are organizing, and then annually they have this regularly, they organize that kinds of program within a country and then sometimes across country also. And especially the migrant organization, sometimes this during the national day of the Qatar, some authority they try to communicate and integrate some of the activities with the migrant group also. And especially this relating with the after this, deciding the having World Cup in Qatar. So this kinds of activities is accelerated, and yeah, now they have a better in compare with the the previous time. They have better cooperation, and then they have collective work among the different nationalities of the migrant workers, and then not only the migrant workers, and then the migrant people who are living in Qatar with the business and some other profession also. So what you mentioned earlier, that cricket, football, and some other activities, it is not only the other community, even this the migrant workers community. They also come together, and then they integrate with the other professional people, and then they try to be together. But taking up this the workers' right issue, they raise the issue, but some of the group, they are not very much interested to take up these kinds of issues. That is the situation. And then whatever thing this the games and other activities, it is not only the other, even the migrant workers, they are very much involved, especially from the Nepal side, I can say.
Mm-hmm. Sebastian, another topic I would like to touch is the sports culture. We have in Qatar, in other countries of the Persian Gulf region as well, one of the highest rates in obesity, depression, because especially women are not as physically active as, for example, in Western society. Do you think that the World Cup can change something? Qatar has the Aspire Academy, for one of the best sports academies, but the day-to-day sports culture with gyms, with pitches, with cycling roads, does it exist, or is the World Cup a starting point for that?
I think it has become a starting point, not only for Qatar, but for the whole region. So for instance, the small Gulf states such as Qatar or the UAE, they have a very, very small national population. So of course, sports can play a role, but it's not as important as, for instance, in countries such as Saudi Arabia. And what we are seeing there in the last couple of years is a tremendous change when it comes to community sports activities. Of course, most of it is driven by the state because sport has become an integral part of identity construction. It is not only for health reasons that sports needs to be promoted. It is also for creating a national unity, national identity. And this is promoted by the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. This is also promoted by Emir Tamim in Qatar and by Mohammed bin Zayed in the UAE. As cornerstones of their identity construction policies. So therefore, promotion of sports is on the one hand a chance for improving social cohesion and for, let's say, empowerment of youth, empowerment of women, the chance to bring specific parts of the society together, as it was explained in the Qatari case, for instance, migrants, expatriates, nationals. So in runners groups, in gyms, in other facilities, that can become possible. But on the other hand, it is an instrument for a political, let's say, it is an instrument for power consolidation. And we need to take this into consideration. Of course, the social transformation in all the Gulf states is related to sports, it's related to entertainment, it's related to education. And this is promoted by the so-called development visions in all of the Gulf monarchies. But on the other hand, it is again aiming the goal of the leadership to preserve its own legitimacy and consolidate its political power. So currently, when I was in Saudi Arabia a couple of weeks ago, I had very interesting conversations with, let's say, civil society actors, if you can call it in the context of Saudi Arabia, but of course, philanthropic organizations, civil society organizations, individuals that have created sport activities, sport events for individuals on a very low profile case level, and so far there is no much control by the state. But sooner or later, there will be more regulation. There will be more control mechanisms introduced. There is the Sports for All Foundation in Saudi Arabia that is now trying to register all the different sports community activities that have been established in the last couple of years. So therefore, the space for intercultural and social communication in a very repressive regime will become less and less. But at the moment, and I think this is also an opportunity for us in Germany, but also in Europe, at the moment there are very interesting players that we could and we should engage with in joint project implementation, but also just to know more about that. So at the moment, there is still a lack of knowledge about sports community efforts in the Gulf states. Maybe Qatar, maybe the situation in Qatar has been tackled a little bit more due to the World Cup, but in other Gulf countries, not only in Saudi Arabia, but also in Oman or Kuwait, for instance, very interesting examples. There is a need to do much more research on this, let's say, sociological field that can also explain to us a little bit more what the social transformation is looking in those countries and societies.
Mm-hmm. Piara, Germany and the UK are probably the countries where the masters of campaigning in football are, right? You have so many campaigns, but in all the anger, all the frustration, what does it bring if the migrant workers in Qatar do not hear something about it? So what would you recommend in the last 6 months before the World Cup? In Germany, for example, there is a movement called Boycott Qatar. There will be alternative football tournaments during the World Cup. There will be other kinds of formats. These 6 months, how can we use them to be active here, to organize, to mobilize here in Germany and the UK and in Western Europe, but also to maybe support, to help people in Qatar? Is it actually possible, or will all our nice messages, which sometimes will be perceived as arrogant from the West, right? In Qatar and Russia, we've seen it before. Sometimes we've been the former colonial powers, arrogant, and again. So you as a master or an expert of campaigning, how would you do it?
Ronny, I think it's really interesting you raised this question at the end of the way in which Western criticism is perceived. And I think it's something that we that shouldn't hold us back, but it's something that we should be very aware of, right? And I think it's something actually that's really coming into focus around the Russian invasion of Ukraine. If you look at attitudes to that around the world and the way in which people are responding to that. And I do keep coming across this perspective from within Qatar and the region, that actually there's a degree of Orientalism at play here. If we weren't Arabs, if we weren't rich Arabs, that you in the West would not really be focusing on us in the way that you are. If we had a host country in Europe, which was, equivalently wealthy as a whole, I think Qatar is obviously the wealthiest country per GDP per head, but if there are other wealthy countries hosting in Europe, we wouldn't have the same sort of focus. And that's a question we constantly have to rebuff. The other question is the question of culture of the region. Are we imposing a Western European culture upon them? So all of these are questions that we're having to deal with, because in the end, I think that we also see the opportunity that an event like the World Cup provides, which is to set international standards for an international tournament. And that then allows us to judge all nations the same. And through those setting of international standards, of course, we're looking at international standards of human rights. And so I think that if I was going to advise anybody as to what they can do, I would suggest that people keep asking questions. It's probably too late now to make meaningful change as an individual. But if you continue to ask questions, if you continue to hold your own governments to account, your own football associations to account and support the sort of activism that is going on, that is probably the best that can be done. I mean, I think the sort of, around us, we have these sort of questions of hypocrisy. You mentioned the visit of the German Chancellor to Qatar. The British government have long established links to Qatar. Many Western European states have similar links. Many of them want to do business with the wealthiest country in the world. And for many of those governments, those business interests come before human rights mitigations. And I think that's the big problem that we have now. I think that the situation that FIFA finds itself in is a little bit different to the situation that FIFA found itself in when they voted for Qatar to receive the World Cup. Previously, and these are the sort of small changes we need to make sometimes to have a big impact. Of course, sometimes the changes need to be more structural and bigger. But when in 2010, the Russia World Cup and the Qatar World Cup were awarded together, it was the FIFA Executive Committee, a small grouping of individuals, all of them men, who voted on who would host the next two World Cups. Now, of course, every single FIFA association, 211 of them, vote for who the next host will be. And that is the basis of the awarding of the 26th World Cup, the USA, Canada, Mexico. So we are moving very slowly towards more democratic processes. FIFA also is now doing more diligent sort of human rights checks on its responsibilities, but those responsibilities are also quite tightly defined. They are defined to the building of stadium infrastructure, and then other infrastructure that they would define as directly related to the hosting of the World Cup. They don't look at, for example, the transportation system in a country like Qatar. They don't look at the airports. They don't look at the hotel infrastructure. So we are moving forward, I think, with FIFA. There are more democratic processes at play. There is a greater focus on human rights. And at the same time, I think we need to make sure that we are challenging our own governments and our own football associations to do what they can. If we had the Scandinavian FAs who have been very outspoken on Qatar, the English, the Scottish, the Welsh, the Irish, the Germans, the Dutch, the sort of Western European progressives, so to speak, if those football associations were to begin to address issues when a World Cup or other competition is begun to be hosted, in the run-up to the sort of 5 to 10 year run-up period, we would see more change, more diligence being used by whatever sporting association is involved in that, whether that's the UEFA as the host of the European Championships, or FIFA for the World Cups, or the IOC for the Winter and Summer Olympics. But in the past, we just have not seen that. So I think for many of us, that has to be the goal, right? We're seeing a lot of athletes who are becoming very active. But for many of those athletes, their activism stands as a moment in time, and it's not carried through by many of us through a kind of an organized plan. I think that's the sort of focus that we, as activists, as concerned people, as human rights enforcers, really need to be looking at.
I'll look on the watch, and we have maybe 10 more minutes, and let's have another brief round, and I include some questions from the audience. Julia, let's start with you. Looking back on your campaign, on your activism, what would you do differently, and how were your experiences with FIFA? You probably did approach to FIFA or to the Brazilian Football Federation, Latin America. Did they listen to you, or did you have to pressure them? Did you have to be loud? So how was your experience with FIFA? Did you think you might have changed them a little bit, or was it all for nothing? So what's your take in Brazil?
Well, I definitely don't believe it was for nothing, but I think that we still are looking forward to see many of the changes we have wanted to see. That is to say, we haven't seen them yet. For us, it was important yes, to tackle the international organizations, but also the Brazilian government that was indeed what our representative elected government that was supposed to defend our rights. And I think that from 2014 till today, I think we have seen some difference. We have seen efforts to build guidelines, to build principles that should be followed. And I think that's something that we are a part of. We believe that we were also a part of this larger movement that says that the mega sporting events can be different. They can be done taking the population into consideration and listening to the population. But till this day, we haven't actually seen that. We have seen people that have said, no, we don't want our country, our city to help hold the games, but we haven't really seen the difference. But yeah, I think that our message was sent. We believe that, so we can say that we had an effect. But okay. Yeah, but we're still looking forward for the real change to happen in future games, and we hope that other people don't suffer as much as we did.
Yeah, thanks. Miriam, Saage-Maaß, there was a question about the international networks that already exist to connect activists. What organizations would you point out, and maybe to add, what kind of tone is necessary? Pressure seemingly doesn't really work. Do we have to be more charming to reach the ruler in Qatar, or do we have to blackmail them economically? So what kind of tone do Amnesty, EC, your organization, Human Rights Watch, would sometimes compete for attention, for publicity? Do they have to work efficiently together? So maybe some final thoughts of you for the activism.
Well, I think what is an effective way is to target the Western actors that are closely linked to the Qatari government, right? And to hold them accountable to normally the standards that they themselves adhere to, or they claim to adhere to. That's at least my experience when you look at companies, no? So, and I think to pressure those companies that do business with Qatar, to pressure, I think it still makes sense, and we should not stop pointing FIFA out to the human rights problems and to this idea of that they could be considered to be closely connected in a way that actually may cause responsibility. I think just because one or two cases have not been successful doesn't mean that this still should be working together. And then in terms of which networks, well, we are not, at ECC, we're not really working like Amnesty International, Human Rights. We're not such an international organization, but I think what is is important is to connect the struggles. So I think to connect the struggles of workers that in Qatar, and to connect the work of organizations like Bindas, those unions, and to connect them with those that are organizing and the activists in Germany or in Europe that are actually targeting their football clubs. I think that's what we need. We need more alliances where the local struggles are connected with each other. Because I do believe that is something that can, and then with those connected struggles, they should be targeting those that are in power and the powerful. And that should be the Qatari government, but it should be also the Western actors that are profiting from and that are very interested in being aligned with the Qatari government.
Mm-hmm. Piara, another question is about how can we put more pressure on Qatari administration to continue reforms in terms of LGBTIQ plus rights? Should sponsors withdraw their engagement? Should football fans maybe show provocatively the rainbow flag? What comes to mind? How should we do it? How can you change society within 6 months?
I think in terms of the rainbow flag, we have managed to get some agreement that the flag will be accepted and not removed. We were told some years ago that it was not an acceptable public symbol in Qatar, but I think we've made some progress on that. So if you're going, by all means, please use it inside stadiums, outside stadiums. It's a small symbolic gesture, but nevertheless, it's meaningful. I think in the end, what we have to do is also recognize the reality of the situation is that if we can make some change in Qatar, and this is what I know that the ILO, BWB and labor unions have argued, is that they have focused on abolishing the kafala system in Qatar and now looking at the legacy of reporting mechanisms for workers in the state. If they can do that in Qatar, then they can take that and achieve more in terms of labor rights in neighboring states, in the Middle East region as a whole, but also in the Gulf region. So I think for us, just bear in mind that the more we can do in the next 6 months, as difficult as it may be, may well lead to some change that others in the region are then also looking at and thinking about how they also could maybe adopt some of those changes. It's going to be tough, particularly on an issue like LGBTIQ rights, but I do think it's important. And I think there have been some interesting sort of developments given the context of the region. And some of those developments, I hope, can give us sort of a platform to do more work in the region, can give those that are active in the more populous states in the Arab Peninsula, give sort of food for thought to people, get them active, get them creating change. I mean, I think one of the really interesting things we've seen recently on gender empowerment, for example, in countries like Iran, countries like Saudi Arabia, and then the sort of interaction of gender empowerment, the health agenda, and then sport gives us something to sort of draw on. It's very tangential. It's not directly related to human rights necessarily, but it has an impact nevertheless. And I think those are the sort of gains that we can make going forward.
Mm-hmm. And Sebastian, maybe one final thought of you. We have the World Cup in Qatar. We have Saudi Arabia buying Newcastle United. We have 3 Formula One races in the Persian Gulf region. Will the sports industry be less Western, and is there a power shift to the Gulf, and probably China coming into the 2030s World Cup? What's your take on the future of the sports industry, and what does it mean for sponsors, for betting, for the entire economical surrounding?
I think we need to take 2 dimensions into consideration. The one is that specifically the Gulf monarchies, they will be interested in hosting big sport events even after the World Cup. Although they have learned the hard way, Qatar have learned the hard way that it's not only a soft policy, and a sports washing instrument, it's also disempowerment instrument. So you need to react on international criticism. You need to react on the blaming and shaming campaign from the international community, and you have to deal with it. So this is a lesson learned also for other Gulf monarchies. So for instance, just imagine what would happen if Saudi Arabia would host the World Cup, and there were aspirations for doing so. So that would create even more backlash for the Saudis than for Qatar for so many reasons. So in this regard, I think that that the World Cup is offering a chance also for future sport events, that human rights, gender empowerment, etc. Will be taken more into consideration if you want to benefit out of it from a Gulf perspective. On the other hand, I think the second dimension is how FIFA and other global sports associations, federations want to be considered in the future, and how they want to act. So if there is a will to make it a little bit more down-to-earth events, and to not only, let's say, demand from the hosting countries to build new state-of-the-art stadiums, if this will not change, then of course the only option will be to host those mega events in countries that can afford. Other than that, we have seen so many popular protests in Germany and other countries in Europe, etc., that the populations are not interested anymore to host those tournaments. And therefore, I think this is a question that FIFA and IOC and others needs to answer. And hopefully the discussion and the debate about Qatar is pointing into the right direction, that sooner or later it is not in the interest of the supporters, and therefore it is also not in the interest of the sponsors, and at the end also not in the interest of the FIFA to host World Cups in countries that are facing so much criticism. That is at least maybe a naive and a too optimistic perspective, but I think the debate about Qatar goes into this direction, and hopefully we can see a much more transparent and a much more, let's say, value-oriented approach when it comes to the whole process in which countries World Cups and other sport events will take place.
And finally, Binda, the question is, when the final whistle of the final will take place in December 2022, how can we make sure we will still talk about Qatar in 2023? How can you do this, the small window of attention? How can you use it for the future beyond the World Cup?
Yeah, it is really the big challenge, and how to sustain the change happen during the last last decade. Beyond the World Cup. So in that regards, I have only the two things. One thing is the whatever network and whatever action we'll be doing. So we need to link it up with the migrant community in the Qatar. So only in that case we can continue this, and we can continue in the dialogue. That is the one thing. And another thing, now some of the companies in Qatar, they have started the joint committee, and in the joint committee up to now, up to last March, as our report, there is a 37 companies, they were having this joint committee, but how it is functioning, and then what kinds of the changes had happened, and then the workers, they have realized it. We haven't had chance yet to interact with them, especially with this the workers representative. So if we could have the one round of the discussion with them, and then listen to them, so based on this the ground reality and the ground experiences, then we could move ahead. And the final point is only the pressurizing from outside, and then some campaign organized from the outside. It would be very difficult to make a change and then sustain that. So we have to focus on this, the migrant workers, migrant community who are really functioning within the Qatar, and then they are living there, and then they are fighting for their right, and then they are campaigning for their right. So we have to work together with them. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
You can take a closer look in the brochure of the Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation or the world map. You can go on the website. There are a lot of articles, a lot of content produced. You can, of course, go to other NGOs, to Amnesty, to Sebastian Sons, to FAIR, to the ACCHR, to many other organizations that collected knowledge and contacts. And yeah, you can take a look at the chat. This debate is recorded, and if friends of yours, colleagues of yours couldn't see it, please spread it to the world. I thank you very much for your expertise, for your time, and I'm very sure we will follow up on that in the next weeks and months to come. Thank you for your attention, and have a good day wherever you may be. Bye-bye.
So thank you, Ronny, and thank you, Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation, for this opportunity. So thank you very much. Very good evening.
Bye-bye.